Hello, it's Maggie the Cheshire Crafter here. This is part 2 of the video of how to reclaim cotton from a men's dress shirt. If you haven't seen part 1, go back and watch that first. If you have, let's come and continue with cutting these shirts apart and unpicking all the seams and seeing how much fabric there is. That's the back and 2 fronts taken off. I've measured them and I'm going to tell you how much fabric there is at the end of this video. At the moment, I'm going to put them both, the back, the 2 fronts together, and I'm going to keep them together in the back. I'm going to take the sleeves apart next. And the reason that I do it in this order is because I feel I can get the most fabric out of it. It looks like I've achieved something, and I'm going to leave the fiddliest parts to a time when I'm going to sit and watch something on the telly. Right, the 2 sleeves then. This is a large man's shirt, and you can see how wide it is across. I'm going to cut this seam, this French seam at the that attaches the sleeve to the front and the back, off completely. I'll leave it in one piece. That's a ribbon strip for me. I'm going to do that on both sides. I'm then going to go to the cuff. I haven't taken the buttons off this yet, but I'm going to open this out, and just above the cuff here, I'm going to cut to completely remove that cuff. The scissors aren't so sharp that they're going to harm me. They're actually quite blunt at the end. So there's my cuff. It's got it's got a buttonhole at one end, and it's got 2 buttons on this one. Put that to one side. Next, I'm going to take apart this section here that houses, I don't know what this bit's called. I do something with these in my art. Sewing. So I'm going to cut that placket out altogether. I don't take it apart, and I just keep that. Well, I'm going to have 2 from each shirt to one side. And now I'm going to cut up the French seam that is the sleeve on either side of the seam. I found that cutting, just opening up that buttonhole front, took me longer than I thought because the stitches are so difficult to see on dark fabric. Having said that, the one side is actually 2.5 inches wider than the other, so it was worth me doing, wasn't it? So from each sleeve, when you open out the sleeve, you've got an irregular shape at the bottom. That doesn't matter. I might get a strip of fabric out of this side. I'll certainly get a 5-inch charm square out of this side. And then I've got a really wide piece of fabric that opens out and then curves at the top. Now, I don't cut my fabric into certain sizes at this point. I leave the whole shirt as large pieces of fabric, and when I come to do a project, I can choose what size I want from that shirt. So I'm going to repeat that on the second sleeve then. From the cuffs and the placket opening on the sleeve, I'm going to remove the buttons. You'll see on my placket openings that I've actually got, if it's unpicked, about 1 inch of fabric. So I'm going to unpick that. That will give me about 4 times 1 inch on each placket opening. And on the sleeve, I'm going to unpick this outer edge. This feels like it's got a very strong interfacing on the inside of it. I'm going to cut with the scissors this side of the buttonhole opening, and I'm going to cut either side of that on both pieces, and then I'm going to unpick these pieces, and I'm going to unpick this row of stitching as well. On the back, you can see the contrasting fabric. I want as much as that as I can get. The way to unpick here is just by going on the inside of the fabric. This is black thread on purple, very difficult to see. Just unpick I'm not damaging the fabric of either piece just by pulling it apart in that way, but just take 1 or 2 cotton threads and then the fabric will just pull away gently. On the front side, I couldn't actually see that cotton thread with the light that I'm working with. Right, if we look at the yoke then, I've got the front and the back. We know that the back is split in half because of the seam there. But if I look on the inside here, there is a piece of velvet ribbon down here. I'm going to keep that too. The labels are sometimes interesting on men's shirts, particularly ones that are like lumberjacky or denim shirts. You get some very interesting labels. This is just a Marks and Spencer's autograph is one of their labels and designs. But if we look on the inside of this, I think it demonstrates that that is a full piece of fabric. It hasn't been cut apart. Is that in focus? You're there. It hasn't been cut apart. So this contrasting piece will be one long piece. Let me take it apart here at the seams at the top and at the bottom seam, and we'll see how much fabric there is there. It will save you a great deal of time if you can find the way that the seam is sewn and then find a thread and just pull. And if it will just unpick as you're pulling, it catches, it's just caught there slightly, but just keep pulling. That has saved me a great deal of time. Let me see if I can find it on the other side. On this side, all I have to do is just pull those 2 pieces of fabric apart and remove the thread from here. There's that thread. That was easy, wasn't it? I'm unpicking the labels from the reverse side. That way I'll cause least damage to the fabric at the front and the label at the front. They're usually sewn on quite tightly, but this is just a single stitch. Not that it wants to come apart. The reverse of the collar then, we can see I've got 1 button. I've got a buttonhole at the other end. I'm going to lose that buttonhole, so I'm going to cut here, and I'm going to carry on cutting right up through to lose that edge. The button will come off here, and I'm going to unpick along this edge, along this edge, and along this outer edge. I can feel inside that there's interfacing on this already. You can see it's puckered a little bit on the reverse of this, and on the other side of it you can see that I've got that contrasting fabric. So what's disappointing here is that the interfacing is actually attached to the contrast fabric, and it's so tightly sewn on that I'm not going to be able to separate it. So I'm only going to be able to use this in something like applique, but I still think it's worth taking off and preserving. I can feel the softness inside the collar here, but again I've got an interfacing applied to the purple, and that was glued on, so that's come off, but that's leave a tacky substance. I'm going to have to cut that corner off because I don't want that glue catching on anything else. For the buttonhole placket, I'm going to cut either side of the buttonhole, discard the buttonhole bit, and then I'm going to open out each of those plackets, because we might have quite a wide, there are 2 seams here, there might be about 2.5 inches of fabric there. Let me see. Front placket then yields some pieces of strips of fabric and others with interfacing. I'll use those for applique. All the smaller pieces go into my scrap bin. Likewise, the small pieces of scrap. smaller pieces of fabric I keep separate then, and I keep those for doing my 1.5 inch patchwork hearts. I can use them in string pieces, and I'll use these pieces for applique. All of the string pieces I'm going to keep together and knot them. I can use those as ribbons or strips in any piece of patchwork I want to do, and I've kept aside one long piece. With that long piece, I'm going to tie together all these pieces. I always fold over the back piece to use as my basic and fold it over. Fold it up at the bottom, and that keeps all those loose pieces in. If I fold it over again, like that, and then I use one of those pieces just to tie it together. And this is how I store this piece of fabric for when I'm wanting a project and I want to cut it up. That's the total sum of fabric that I've got from that shirt. In addition to that, I've got the contrasting fabric, all of the string pieces, all of the buttons, there were 17, and 2 labels, and in addition to that, we've got some more 1.5 inch pieces and strips. So that's a lot out of that shirt. It took me about 3 hours, probably 4, because I was watching the television as I was deconstructing this shirt. I'm going to show you now exactly the same on the grey shirt. Well, I'm going to deconstruct that grey shirt in exactly the same way. The only thing I'm going to show you is something different, is just removing the pocket from the front side. My advice on that is really to try and keep it in the shape of a pocket, but to remove it like the label on the reverse side, so that you don't damage the fabric on the front and don't damage the fabric behind the pocket. Sometimes you'll find the colour difference once you've removed the pocket. If this fabric has faded, the colour behind the pocket will be a more vibrant colour than the pocket and will show on the front of your fabric. Fortunately, once I've removed the pocket, the colour difference isn't noticeable, so I can reclaim that whole front. I'm going to see how much fabric there is in this whole shirt, but I'm going to watch a Christmas film while I take this one apart. I measured as I went, and this was a large men's shirt. In the UK, a fat quarter is 18 inch by 22, so I've got more than a fat quarter from the back. The 2 fronts together are a fat quarter plus. That gives me half a yard. The sleeves together would be another equivalent of a fat quarter, although they're an awkward shape. Likewise, the yoke and the cuffs and the collar are an awkward shape. I've probably got about a yard of fabric here, but I've certainly got 3/4 of a yard of good usable yardage. I've also got contrast and extras, so all in all about a yard of fabric, plus buttons, plus labels, plus contrast, plus ribbon strips, plus buttons, and I'm very pleased with that because that cost me £5.99. Well, I'm very surprised to measure that when I've taken the small shirt apart, again, I've got 3/4 of a yard of fabric, which don't forget is reversible, the contrast, the ribbon strands, 17 buttons, 2 labels, some scraps to use, and a partridge in a pear tree. I'm delighted with that. So I feel that that was worthwhile, and I've enjoyed taking these lovely shirts apart. I'm going to enjoy doing some projects with these in the future, but for now, this is Maggie, the Cheshire Crafter, saying bye for now. Come back and see me soon, won't you?